Our second video for today is about seedless vascular plants. So if we go back to our cladogram, you will see that seedless vascular plants is our next type of plant in the evolutionary process. And notice that basically from now on, all the plants will have vascular tissue. And remember, vascular tissue is a transport tissue that allows plants to be able to move materials up and down to be able to transport materials that are needed for the plant to survive. So this caused plants to be able to reach enormous sizes. And so these plants are, the majority of these plants are ferns and friends. So they're lycophytes, horsetails, and ferns. And you might have seen the lycophytes and the horsetails before. And the lycophytes, they look like, mini pine trees. You might have thought that they were mini pine trees, but they're actually vascular seedless plants, which is different than pine. Okay, so vascular seedless plants do have roots and stems and leaves, and they transport material, and they have a great variety in size and form. And these plants still have to have high moisture. So if you go to somewhere like the tropics, you might find very, very large ferns. For example, in my country, in Costa Rica, they have very large ferns. You notice here in this picture, there is a man standing next to a humongous fern. So they come in different sizes. I don't know if you've ever looked, but if you have ferns in your house, I would really like you to go and take a look at this because this is one of my favorite things about ferns. If you look at the back of the leaf of the fern, you will see these little structures here called sorus. The singular word is sori. Sorry, the plural is sori. The singular word is sorus. So one of these is sorus. These are sori. So sori are clusters of sporangia. So each of these little circles here are capsules that enclosed a bunch of spores for the fern. So some of the things that are important for you to know about ferns is that at one point in the evolutionary history of the planet, ferns were the main ferns, and these seedless vascular plants were the most popular plants and dominated our planet. So notice here you see a picture of many different types of ferns and seedless plants that were present. Now, what you would see if you go outside, you would see, first of all, a huge diversity of life. You would see some seedless vascular plants, but the majority of the plants and trees that you see today would be actually seeded and flowering. So they're no longer the ruling plant of the planet. Another interesting thing for us to know is that these organisms, when they died millions of years ago, they actually compressed and formed something that we all depend on a lot, named coal, right? And coal is the thing that we mine, the rock that we mine to be able to produce energy. And so coal is made from compressed, over millions of years, compressed ferns and other plant type material. Okay, so the last thing we have to do, this is going to be a shorter video than the other one, is talk about the reproductive system of ferns. So one of the things that I'm going to talk about is that the differences and similarities to ferns, and we're going to compare them to the mosses. So in the mosses, we talked about how most of the life of the moss spends in the gametophyte stage. Ferns here are completely the opposite. They spend most of their time on the sporophyte phase. So they are, you will see when you walk outside, what you would see is this. You would see the giant leaves of fern, and you would see the little sori, the little circles on the back. And that's what a sporophyte, that's the life of the sporophyte in terms of the fern. So back to your assignment, your photograph assignment that you have to do with your partner. This would be a good picture to take for a sporophyte plant, finding a fern and taking a picture of it, because it spends most of its life as a sporophyte. So you notice here, there's the big. I'm going to start here, and again, this is the sporophyte. And if you notice here, it says the diploid. It spends most of its time as a diploid, 2N. And you have the giant leaves, and underneath you will have the sori that have the little spores. And then these spores will then be, when the conditions are right, these sporangia will then release, copy and paste through the process of meiosis, copy and reproduce and separate, and then it will release the spores. Now, when these spores are released, they also need water. So remember how this is a similarity to mosses. Remember how mosses need water for the spores to move. The same thing here, and the sperm also has a flagella, and it needs water to move it. So when the spores move, they're going to settle into something called the gametophyte stage, right? Well, the gametophyte stage is a tiny, tiny plant. So how do you know here where the antheridium is where it makes a heart shape plant. But it's really, really tiny. So it's so small that it's 5 millimeters. So you probably wouldn't really even see it. But if you want to look, if you have ferns, you would look underneath the ferns. So once the sperm move and create this little heart-shaped plant, so the eggs will be in this heart-shaped plant, and the sperm would have to swim and actually fertilize the eggs in this little heart-shaped plant called the prothallus. So it's a tiny, tiny plant. Now, if the sperm successfully fertilizes the egg, it forms the zygote, as you guys know, and notice that then this plant, this little tiny plant, forms a young sporophyte. Okay, now over a long time, this sporophyte then will grow into a mature plant, and then the whole process will start all over again. This is all for the vascular non-seed or seedless plants. If you guys have any questions, make sure you ask, and make sure you understand the differences and similarities between mosses and fern.